Welcome to the Big Blue Breakdown as we go over the three key matchups for the New York Giants in Sunday's home game against the Washington Commanders. Now, the Giants have lost three in a row, and the Commanders are coming off an absolutely incredible, dramatic victory over the Chicago Bears. And I'm sure if you didn't watch it when it was on last weekend, you've seen the highlights since. The Hail Mary pass at the end of the game. Noah Brown comes down with the ball in the end zone, and Washington comes out with the victory. Well, that's allowed them to win two in a row and six of their past seven. Now, that roll started when they beat the Giants in week 2 at home. Remember, that was after they had lost their opening game at Tampa, came back, played the Giants, could not score a touchdown, made 7 field goals, and beat the Giants at the gun on a last-second field goal. So it ought to be very interesting to see if the Commanders really have become a much better team than they were then, or are they a team that the Giants can outplay? And then, of course, the other question becomes, will the Giants self-destruct and still wind up walking away with a defeat? All right, let's talk about the state of the Giants for just a second, because they've got an awful lot of guys on the injury list. Now, what it looks like right now, we know that Jamie Gillen and Graham Gano, the kicker and the punter, and I only mention that because we know that Gano was an issue in that Washington game when he injured his hamstring trying to chase down Austin Eckler on the opening kickoff. The Giants did not have a kicker the rest of the game. They scored 3 touchdowns. They lost by 3 points. Unable to come up with a point after attempt. Gillen had a miss. They didn't go for any. They went for 2s after that. It was just not a good situation. All right, so nothing's changed as far as we could tell with the special teams kickers. What we do know is that in terms of key players in the Giants' offensive and defensive lineups, Joshua Ezeudu had his knee drained the other day. Whether or not he's able to go on Sunday, we're still not sure. He was limited at practice this week, okay? But we just don't know exactly where he stands. The thing about Ezeudu is that we thought he was going to start last week against Pittsburgh, and then found out that veteran Chris Hubbard, who had just come to the organization a few days earlier, would get the start. We're going to assume that that's because Ezeudu had swelling in his knee, which had to get drained. So it remains to be seen how the Giants go this week. Was Hubbard more of an emergency starter, or was he simply the starter because they were not pleased with the way Ezeudu was playing? That's a flip of the coin right now, so we will see what the Giants decide to do on Sunday. Bryce Ford-Wheaton has not practiced as we speak about this on Friday morning because of a sore Achilles. Now, why is that important? Well, besides Nick McLeod, he is probably the best of the Giants on the special teams coverage units at getting downfield. Now, he did miss a tackle on Calvin Austin the other day on that punt return for a touchdown. So that's disappointing. You'd like to see him bounce back off of that. The question becomes, though, is he even going to be able to play? Again, not practicing as of Friday morning. Other items, Tyrone Tracy had the red jersey on Thursday afternoon at practice, which means he's one step away from getting out of the concussion protocol. The Giants would certainly love to have him. Had his second 100-yard game of the season against the Pittsburgh Steelers the other night. We do know that Amir Smith-Marset, with a sore ankle, was upgraded to limited participation Thursday afternoon. So that bodes well for him. Again, 47-yard kickoff return the other night against the Steelers. Giants would certainly love to have him back because we don't hear anything at all about Olszewski. So it looks to me as if Smith Morissette, at least for the time being, is their best option at returning kicks. And we just don't know exactly what Olszewski's progress is. So the Giants would certainly love to have Smith Morissette back in there. We did see upgrades from limited practice sessions for Burns and Illuminor up to full late Thursday afternoon. Other guys who are all limited, don't know much about where they're going to land. John Runyon, though, was limited because of a sore foot on Thursday afternoon. And that's something that I'm sure the Giants were not happy to see. That would probably mean Aaron Stinney, a former Tampa Bay Buccaneer, would have to step in if Runyon is unable to go on Sunday. All right, as far as the Giants locker room is concerned, let's make something very clear. This team is resilient. This team has leaders in the locker room, and they certainly believe that they are together as they try to get out of this and turn around what has been a very difficult 2-6 start to the season. They've got Washington this week, then Carolina and Munich, then the bye week. Can they somehow struggle through and pick up a couple of wins to the bye week so that they can reset and try to do something with the second half of the season? That's got to be the goal right now, although individually, every coach and player will tell you it's one game at a time. All right, in terms of a couple of key players for the Giants, we know what happened with Tay Banks against Pittsburgh last week. Banks, with about a minute or so to go in the first half, was taken out of the Giants lineup. Stroman came in, played the rest of the way, did a solid job, but it looks like, based on what defensive coordinator Shane Bowen said this week, that Banks is refocused, he's ready to go, they have confidence in him, and they expect him to bounce back as he did earlier this year when he had a terrific game guarding DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks. This week, he'll get Terry McLaurin. We'll talk more about that matchup in just a minute. The other item from the locker room this week, Malik Neighbors basically said, first of all, he has totally forgotten about week 2. It is in the past. And so the fourth down drop that he had with about 2 minutes to go is no longer on his mind. Now, he did address the drops, saying that sometimes they just happen. You think about them, they bother you, they basically keep you up at night, but at the same time, he said sometimes they just happen. He hasn't found a common thread in those situations, other than to say he's had a few where he felt he leaned into the ball too much, and instead of attacking the ball with his hands and catching it away from his body, he allowed the ball to ricochet off of his body, and maybe that was part of the reason why he had not been able to make some of the catches. But he did say sometimes, it can be a focus thing where you're concentrating on trying to make yards after the catch. He said he doesn't think that's been his issue. Thinks he's been able to get through that, and that sometimes these drops just happen. So that's the state of the locker room as it stands right now and the state of the Giants. Let's quickly go over what's going on with the Washington Commanders. 2 significant starters did not participate in practice as of Thursday afternoon. That is tackle Cornelius Lucas and linebacker Frankie Louvu. Now, if Cornelius cannot go, he is the starting left tackle. 3rd round draft pick Brandon Coleman is the likely candidate to move into the starting lineup. That obviously would be an issue for the Commanders if it does occur. Lucas has an ankle. Louvu has a shin injury. Now, he hasn't practiced up to this point this week either. He is the starting weak side linebacker. What would the Commanders do there? Well, Nick Bellore, former Seattle Seahawk, is the guy next up on their 2 deep. That would be a significant injury. Louvu made a couple of big plays against the Giants last time in week number 2. Coleman himself, by the way, I should just mention this. He is back to full participation at practice. Brandon Coleman, the backup left tackle, he had a concussion earlier, but he is back at practice, so he would be able to go. I want to make sure we clarify that. They've got some bumps and bruises and ailments over there with some of their guys limited and so forth. Don't think that's going to be a significant issue for the Commanders on Sunday. However, there is one guy I do want to mention, defensive end Clelin Ferrell, with a knee injury, had been limited earlier in the week and then did not practice at all on Thursday. Now, that would be something to keep an eye on. I don't know if they just gave him a Veterans Day off and some rest or something acted up on him. I would think that Dante Fowler probably would take Ferrell's snaps if he is unable to go. Ferrell is primarily more of a run-stopping, edge-setting defensive end than he is a pass rusher. Let's get to our 3 key matchups to watch. The real important ones that, you'd like to win if you're the Giants, if you're going to come away with a victory in this one. We're going to start out with Tay Banks at corner against Terry McLaurin. And why not? Okay? Let's make something very clear. Washington is 3rd in the National Football League, averaging 30 points a game on offense. And if you go back to that Giants game, when they were held to 7 field goals and beat the Giants 21-18, they have scored a minimum of 23 points in every other game since. In fact, outside of the 23 points they scored against Baltimore, they had been scoring in the 30s and 40s, okay, until this past weekend when they slumped against the Chicago Bears. Now, the Bears played really good defense, but fell 18-15 in a game that was heralded between the 2 rookie quarterbacks, right? Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams. Neither quarterback looked very good. Both defenses played well, and the Commanders truly looked like a mediocre football team. Is that the team the Giants are going to see this week? I just don't know. But here's what I can tell you. For the most part, since that Week 2 game against the Giants, Washington's offense has been clicking on a much higher level. Daniels is 2nd in the NFL in completion percentage at nearly 72%. He has not been making the typical kind of mistakes that a rookie quarterback makes. He has only thrown 2 interceptions all season, which is tied for the 6th fewest in the National Football League. Now, if you want to look at something that's kind of odd about this, think about how low his interception number is, considering that his average yards per attempt is 8.5, which is 5th in the league, which means he's getting the ball downfield. And usually, the more you throw the ball downfield, the higher the risk of a turnover. Not the case with Daniels. All right, the Giants did sack him 5 times in Week 2. That's a very important number to keep in mind because the Giants are on a roll right now in terms of getting to the quarterback, specifically Azeez Ojulari, who has 5 sacks over the last 3 weeks. Anyway, I digress. The point I really wanted to make about Banks against Terry McLaurin is that McLaurin is 4th in the NFL with 579 receiving yards. He had a 66-yard touchdown catch against the Cleveland Browns early in the month. It was the first weekend of the month. And has 4 touchdown catches on the season. 3 times he's gone over 100 yards this season. And what it does appear from watching the tape and from talking to the Giants players is that McLaurin and Daniels seem to have found more of a rhythm. They seem to be much more comfortable with each other than they did the first couple of weeks of the season. And it looks as though that connection is well on its way to becoming very, very dangerous. And that is why I believe you've got to be very careful if you're Tay Banks. Look, last week against the Bears, Washington only scored 18 points. McLaurin had 5 grabs for 125 yards. All right? That's one of the 3 100-yard games that McLaurin has had this season. So if you're Tay Banks, yeah, you do have your work cut out for you. The difference between McLaurin and Metcalf, though, which remember, Metcalf was shut down and contained by Banks. Metcalf, not the speed of a McLaurin, not the elusiveness of a McLaurin. He's a bigger, stronger guy who will fight you for the ball downfield. McLaurin is a speed guy who can really do some damage in terms of running around you and also attacking the football and making some very big plays. So we look at Tay Banks against Terry McLaurin as our number 1 key matchup in this one. Secondly, we're going to Bobby Okereke, the Giants middle linebacker, against running back Brian Robinson Jr. Now, Okereke had a breakout game against Pittsburgh. 7 solos, 7 assists for a season high, 14 tackles, a forced fumble and fumble recovery. You'll recall that with about 4 minutes to go in the game. That was the Bobby Okereke that we saw last year. He was back on full display and really bowling out and playing incredibly well all over the field, hitting people. The Giants will need that from Okereke this week. Robinson ran for one of his 2 100-yard games against the Giants in week 2. 17 carries for $133. And as we know, the Giants have had a lot of trouble stopping the run this year. Defensive coordinator Shane Bowen saying they do a pretty good job for most of the game. But it's always those 5 plays or so, those handful of plays, where they'll give up a big chunk play in the run that winds up throwing everything off. Well, the Giants cannot afford to do that against Robinson. He has 6 rushing touchdowns on the season, tied for 6th in the NFL, has a long of 40, so he does have the ability to get downfield and make a big play. He's run for over 450 yards on the season and is averaging 4.5 yards a pop. Now, not to disregard Jaden Daniels and his running ability, because he's averaging over 5.5 yards a carry, 6th overall in the NFL, but it doesn't look like Daniels over the last 2 weeks wants to run as much because he's got those sore ribs. Remember, he had to come out of a game. Marcus Mariota had to come in and relieve him a couple weeks back because he got cracked in the ribs. So Daniels doesn't look like he's too eager to take off with the ball because of that issue. His best game running the ball, by the way, this year was against Tampa Bay. 16 carries for 88 yards. So I'm looking at Brian Robinson Jr. against Bobby Okereke as the second key matchup for the Giants. Contain Robinson. Don't allow the Commanders to be multidimensional, and see what you can do simply against the arm of Daniels, who, by the way, because of the ribs, it didn't look last week like he was throwing the ball really as well as he had in the previous month or so. The third key matchup to watch. Well, if the Commanders play it straight, right corner Benjamin St-Juste would be going against Malik Nabers. Now, Nabers was talking this week about how earlier in the season teams were playing him one-on-one. That's because they were trying to feel him out. They were clearly looking for signs as to how quickly Nabers would become an impact player. There was a lot of hype with him as a rookie coming into this league. But, as all rookies, they make mistakes. And they need to grow into the position and to command and earn the respect of being a big-time pro. Well, Nabers says over the course of the last couple of games, he has now seen a lot of safeties over the top, either brackets or double coverages that he was not seeing earlier in the year. But he said, hey, don't worry about it. I was used to that at LSU. I've always had to deal with double coverages. It's not as fun, and you have to find different ways to try to work harder and get open. But Neighbors pretty much is expecting that from the Commanders. St. Juste, he's a tall, lengthy defensive back. There are times where he will make a terrific play because of his length and because he's able to get into the box there and knock a ball down with his ball skills. But there are also other times where he gives up yards and yards of separation. He is a very inconsistent up and down corner and has been throughout the entire course of his NFL career. We'll see if the Giants are able to try to isolate Neighbors on St. Juste as much as possible, because with the jukes and quickness that Neighbors has, he should be able to gain separation on Benjamin St. Juste. So those are the three key matchups that the Giants need to maybe exploit as they play Washington coming up on Sunday at MetLife Stadium. We'll be back on Monday morning with the Big Blue Breakdown, our game balls and gassers for the Giants offense, defense, and special teams. I'm Paul Dottino, and we will see you then here on the Big Blue Breakdown.